Hello and welcome to the 21st episode of my devlog from Wisp, where I discuss the status of Wisp and pick one ludological topic to talk about. This week's ludological topic is complexity in games. If you are not interested in the progress report, just press here, and then you will skip ahead to the ludological topic. So this week I actually went to Munich to the Xbox event, and I had a great time there, but that also meant I didn't have as much time doing things. So I'm still in the progress of setting up my server. I have a lot of stuff to learn because I'm not that familiar with all that stuff. I'm using ASP.NET if you are interested. What I also did is besides setting up the server, I did some music. I changed the music in the game, which was a small thing I did. I already prepared a lot of that, and right now I have only music pieces without any vocals in them because I really dislike the vocals in the game. I thought they were really distracting. Yes. So the server setup, as I said, it's ASP.NET, and I am currently learning all the things. And like, I also need to install a lot of stuff on my server and get everything up and running. This will take a little bit of time. Yes. So that's already the progress report. That's basically all I did for this week. So let's jump into the ludological topic. The ludological topic this week is complexity in games, as I said before. And first off, what is complexity? Like I guess most people know, but basically it's like, how do I put it best? Um, it's a system that gives you a lot of choice. Let's put it like this. That's actually, I think, a good definition. Like a good of choice and a good of possibilities of stuff to do. You can see it here in the path, in the skill tree of Path of Exile. There's a lot of stuff you can do, and it's like obviously pretty complex. But not content by itself is complex. Like you actually have to have decisions, meaningful decisions at least. With the choices available to you. If all the choices are the same, I would not say it's complex, it's just much stuff to do. Yes, so with that out of the way, what are the benefits of complexity in games? So the most obvious benefit I would say is that the game gets deep. People have a lot of stuff to think about. If you saw when you saw the tree before, like there are a lot of people who will spend a lot of time outside the game and in the game thinking about how they can skill their character. But not only that, it will increase the replayability. If you have a game that has a lot of complexity in it, you can actually, because of all the choices people can do, they can try out stuff, see if it works, see if it doesn't work. All that stuff is pretty good in complexity. It also increases the skill level involved, because if decisions are complex, not everyone will be able to handle them in the same way. So you increase the skill that is needed for your game. I wanted to mention last week, I forgot to say, or I maybe didn't say it clearly enough. Yeah, it was last week with randomness, yeah. That basically you can have high skill and high luck games. I just wanted to say that. I don't know if I think it was last week where I wanted to mention it. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Yeah, so what are benefits of complexity in games besides depth and skill? Um, I actually think that are the biggest ones, to be honest. But you should not underestimate the depth and the interesting decision part. Like if you don't have any complexity, basically, unless you have a Twitch game, you don't have any real game. Like if you have no decisions and no reaction, basically you don't have an interactive medium. The interactivity comes just from doing something, and like one of the interesting things you can do is getting interesting decisions. But this podcast is not as much about the complexity or the benefits. It's more about the dangers of complexity in games, the problems basically. So one of the problems, I think one of the hugest problems is that if you have too much complexity in a game, it actually is pretty scary to people. Like the skill tree we saw before of Path of Exile. I think a lot of people will not play the game just because they see it. Like, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that there are a lot of people just because they see it, they really like it. It it's you have to keep a balance in mind. But if you have such a huge amount of possibilities, like a lot of people will get afraid and will not play it. What that means is that the barrier to entry gets higher. But not only the barrier to entry, also the barrier to stay. If there's a lot of like the increase in skill that I said as a benefit can also act as a deficit basically, because depending on the game you are making, if you want to have a casual game, you probably shouldn't have it be too complex, or maybe you should. Like it really depends on your game design. You just need to think about that. If you have a lot of complexity, it can scare people. It will also mean that if you have a turn-based game, or even if you have a real-time game, that the decisions will take more time. Like that's not a problem in a skill tree like Path of Exile, because you have basically infinite time. That's a great thing to put complexity in, because people can think outside the game about it, which is also a great way to handle complexity, is to put the complexity outside the game. I actually forgot that later in some solutions, and I think that's a good thing to do. If you have complexity and people can think outside the game and then come back to the game and then apply it, that's a great place to put a lot of complexity in. It still has the problem of being very scary and a high barrier to entry, but at least people have enough time to think about it and then come back and apply it and try the stuff. So that's a good thing, and that's also a thing that that should be pointed as a benefit of complexity in games, is that if you have a high complexity like the skill tree, people can think about it outside the game. I don't know if I mentioned that before in the benefit section. Yeah, so one of the problems I think that a lot of games are doing wrong, like actually most of games I think are doing wrong, is putting all the complexity up front and not really have a way, like an integrated way into the game design itself to get the people led to know or increase the complexity basically over time. The this is the what is it, the Dota 2 hero selection and item selection screens. Like all of these choices are put on a player at the first game they play. Like maybe not in a tutorial, but basically soon afterwards, even if you count the tutorial as kind of an introduction, which is fine, but soon afterwards they will basically have to pick out of all these champions, and then they join a game, and then they will have to pick out of all these items multiple times. And also I expected to know how this donkey works, the flying donkey and everything. Like there's so much stuff going on in Dota. It's incredible. This makes it very interesting for people. I can understand that. And there's also people seem to like it, especially after they mastered it, because basically it gives them an edge over newer players. And actually people like that. They say, okay, I spent the time, so I have an edge over newer players. That's great. So it's actually like an RPG progression, just with knowledge. But it's a little bit better because it's just knowledge. Like nothing against RPG progression, but RPG progression just happens, and this you still need to know something at least to get better. And but it's not really your skill; it's just your knowledge about the systems, which I think is fine. But it's like really up and centered in this game, and I think that's not a good design. Like from a design standpoint, I would not like to have that much complexity up front. Like there are more games like that. Like I just played Thea today. It's a great game. Don't get me wrong. I really like it, but I started playing and it's so, like I'm working, I'm programming in my day job as well, and so if I get home and I get that much complexity, I kind of am tired about this. I don't really want to think as much about all that stuff. And like that's a little bit too much for me. Like I'm not saying, like I know that there are a lot of people who really enjoy these very complex things, and I actually also like complexity. I just don't like if it's too much upfront. Basically, if it's too much at once, it will kind of turn me off. Like if you like kind of put me slow into it, like you can you can probably get me to do these, to know all these things, but just don't give it to me at the very beginning. Hide all that stuff away. Don't show me that stuff. Like, make 20 missions that before I get there. It's completely fine. That's a good approach of hiding complexity, basically. But we will come to that later. Like, actually, we are here. That's gated complexity. So, gated complexity, what it does is just basically hiding the complexity at the beginning. Like, we saw the Dota 2 screen, and a lot of people really like it because it's free to play and you can select all the heroes. And I actually think that's a great thing as well. But I don't like it as a first player experience. What I think they should have done is they could have still made it that you only have a few heroes at the beginning and then very quickly get new heroes. And either fixed or you can pick them, it doesn't matter, but they could have integrated it in the game as a new player experience to actually get the heroes. And like these free-to-play games as HOTS, like here, or also LoL, where they have a rotation, they actually have it built in their monetization system, a fix for the problem. Because if you start off Heroes of the Storm, you will only have these 7 characters available to you, unless you buy other ones. But like, who would do that if they play first? Nobody would. So basically, you just have these 7 characters, and like that's a choice I actually feel fine to make. Like, I can read through these. I can maybe even say, yeah, I don't really want to play the Stitches guy. I don't really like him because maybe of flavor reasons. I just want to see this, or something like that. And then I feel like I can make a decision without feeling completely overwhelmed. So I think that's an interesting way of gated complexity. It comes at the backdraw of the monetization in these games, but it doesn't have to be a must. Like, Dota could just as well have said, you start with 4 characters, these are the 4 easy ones, and every game you unlock a new one. That's not a bad thing. And you know what? I wouldn't even let them choose which one, just because then you would be overwhelmed again because you have to choose between all of them. Maybe give them the choice of 3 or something like that. Like, that's completely fine, I think. That's completely fine. That would be a valid way. In like 50 games, they would have unlocked all the characters. That's fine. Everybody plays 50 games very, very easy before they get competitive in games like these. So actually, it would have come at almost no cost for Dota to do this, and it would increase the first player experience by a ton. And what HOTS also did, they don't have items at all, so the entire item complexity is gone. So actually, HOTS did a great deal to decrease the upfront complexity and the overall complexity. People complain because they decreased the complexity overall, and they did a little bit, but they didn't really need to. They could have went other ways that still kept the same complexity level or similar complexity levels. And I think they did very similar, but they still decreased it a little bit. Another way to have gated complexity is basically items in RPGs. Because like at the beginning, you don't actually have all of them. You just have a couple of them. Then once you get rolling, you can maybe do like 5, 6 items. And then the more you progress, the more items get unlocked and the more choices you have. So the more you play, the deeper the gameplay gets, which is exactly what we want. We want to have people that can easily get into the game and then get more and more complex decisions later on. I think that's a great way, which is also gated complexity. What I mean by gated complexity is you basically hide away information from the player at the beginning. You don't give them the full picture of information. Rather than doing that, you just give them a subset of the picture. And with this subset of the picture, people will not feel overwhelmed. And then, as time goes on, you will unlock more and more things. And like card games do that as well. Like if you draw a handful of. You get like your first magic deck. You only have the cards to worry about in the deck. Then you maybe get your first booster, and then you have maybe 10 new cards or 12 or however, it's 13 or 14. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. And then like as time goes on, you increase and increase and increase and increase and increase the complexity. I think that's a very good way of having very complex systems with a lot of content, spreading out the complexity. But always keep in mind that some people will still look at everything and will get kind of afraid. Like there are people who will look at your game and look at all the characters before they even start the game. Like they will look at screenshots where there's all these characters as you saw before here. Like they will see, like in HOTS you see like a similar amount, maybe it's not exactly the same, but it doesn't really matter for my point. Like they would see all these characters even if you just would give them 6 at the beginning. And they might still get scared and not play your game. So always keep that in mind if you have that high of a complexity. Then there's something that I really actually enjoyed, and I think it's very underused in games, which is emergent complexity. Like, actually there are some games that do it, but the kind of complexity I was thinking about, the system I was thinking about, I only found in Path of Exile. Once again, the game itself is very complex at the skill level thing, but they also have like very nice emergent complexity with their socket system. I actually didn't play it as much Path of Exile, but I really like their system. Like as you see here, this is a support gem. Like skills in Path of Exile work like this. You can put this gem into a weapon, I think. Like if I'm not saying this completely correct, I'm sorry. But I just want to make a point. I know it works somehow like this. It actually here, yeah, it says you have to put it in a socket. I don't even know if it needs to be in a weapon or not. It doesn't really matter. So, but basically you can socket it into something. It doesn't actually matter what. Maybe it's the spell itself. I don't really care. And it will give the effect that is set here to the spell, which means here the projectile will fork, which means like they will like lightnings, it will fork. At least that's how I imagine it. Like I know there are different ones. Like this one I think is also a socket like this. Maybe it's not. Like maybe people will go and get angry, but like that they spread out like that, and like they have like a lot of these things that you can basically combine to make very great effects. Like look at this here. It increases the projectile damage by almost nothing and decreases it again. That's very weird. Per 1% quality. Ah, okay. And where's the quality? See, it's a little bit complex. Like I actually didn't read this. Anyway, so basically it decreases the projectile damage. I guess if the quality is high, it's only 11%. If it's the highest quality, if it's the lowest, it's 30%. Or maybe it's just random. I don't know. It doesn't really matter for my point. But it basically reduces the projectile damage, but therefore you get multiple projectiles, and it increases the mana. And so what that means is that you can basically have your normal fireball, and now your normal fireball will fork, and you can do that with all your spells. And so that's actually a very interesting way to have emergent complexity, because like you would only need like if you say you have like 6 support gems and 3 normal spells, you have a lot of combinational possibilities. Like let's say you can put 3 support gems into every spell. That would mean that you have I actually cannot do the math right now, but it's actually a lot of possibilities you can do to combine each spell with all of these 6, and these are all 6 different. So there's actually a lot of stuff that you can do with only 9 items, and 9 items don't look that scary. And that's the great thing about emergent complexity, is that because it's not obvious at the beginning and you don't get scared because it's like not that much content. It's just the system that is actually creating the complexity, and not the sheer number of things you can do or you have to do. And I think that's a really important distinction. If you have a system that is really complex but only has like a couple of rules, it doesn't really, it's not as scary to people. Like, it still has the high skill and everything, and it still might turn people off because it's so complex from a skill perspective, but it will not make them so afraid, and it will also most likely not have such a high barrier to entry because people will not feel overwhelmed. If you say to someone, here are 3 spells, and here are 6 gems, or 6 things to make them better. Pick 1 spell and 3 of them. People will be able to do that pretty quickly. They will read the 9 things and then say, yeah, let's try this, and this. Like, especially if you say like it's like not locked in, you can change it anytime, you can basically play around with it, then it's fine. Even if you do not say that, it's also okay. Like they might think a little bit longer about this, but they will come to a conclusion in the end. Whereas if you say like if you would have the same thing, like let's say, like I know it's more probably, but like let's say it would be all the combinations would be 60 combinations that you could do with this. I think it's more, but it doesn't really matter. If you would have even just 60 combinations, 60 single item spells, I mean, that all are represented in the system, it actually gets way more complicated because they will need to read all these things. Even if all these 60 would be you would be able to represent the system I just talked about. I can give you an example to make it more clear. Let's say you have like, let's go back to this example here. You have a fireball and a lightning bolt and an ice bolt, let's say. Okay? So these are your 3 spells. And like you have, first off, you have an item that says it spreads out like this in a circle around you. Then you have something that forks it, like it goes out and then it maybe, let's say like it does Arcane missiles, because I don't know what fork means. It does Arcane missiles, it does like 3 in a direction, but it increases the damage way more than this. Then there is one that's actually target aiming, which means even if you shoot there, it will go there. Then there is one that that will, let's say, I don't know, whatever. It will just increase the damage. There's one that will just increase the range, and there like a couple of them more. And as you can see already, like all the possibilities you have here, like maybe one that just increases the size of the effect itself, so it will just get a bigger effect. So all the combinations you have here now are very interesting. You could do either long-range projectiles that will search a target, and like the Arcane missile, so you have basically a high damage output. Maybe you will have stuff that will trigger on a percentage chance every time it hits. So maybe you want to have a lot of small projectiles with very less damage that maybe spawn another projectile if they hit something like that, like chain lightning or something like that. And then you have very different skills or spells, and a lot of them without actually putting all the complexity on the player upfront. Or like you putting all that up front, but it's because it's in the system, they can actually think it through easier, and it's like not that overwhelming. I don't know how else to explain it. The player feels more empowered first off, and it's not that you don't get blown away by all the things you have to read. Like actually just reading stuff makes a huge difference, I think. Like reading rules, reading everything. If you have a system and you just explain how it works, people will figure out the rest. Even like the thing about emergent complexity is also that maybe you didn't think about stuff before that. Maybe you didn't think about all the combinations because it's just too much. But it doesn't really matter because you don't need to read through all of them, and if you just forget them, it's fine. So yeah, and then later on you will still have the benefit of people who know better, they know more combinations, they may know more interesting combinations. And not all of them might be perfect, but that's not a huge deal. Yes, that's emergent complexity. I called this intuitive complexity, or maybe you could also call it complexity supported by theme. And this is actually Divinity Original Sin, the screenshot here. And what this game does, there are other games to do this. I just remember that this game does it, so I just wanted to say it. Basically, the theme supports the complexity inside the game, and because it's so logical, it doesn't really feel like complexity at all. Like, this is a very classic example of RPGs. Water will will be good at I don't know the English word with electrical stuff. Basically, it's good with electrical stuff. Water is bad against, or is good against against fire, not with, but against fire. Fire is good with like I don't know wood stuff and so on and so, or against wood stuff and so on and so forth. So basically, what you are doing is you take something that people already know. Fire burns wood. Water is good with. I should not use the word if I don't know how to say it. Water will stop fire. Stuff like that. Stuff that people already know and put it into your game and have complexity that way. It will increase the complexity in the sense of there are more interesting decisions to be made. Like you can let it rain and then cast your spell, and like you can have these combinations, which is once again emergent complexity as well. But you don't need to explain it. Whereas what I had before, I really needed to explain to you, like, okay, this will fork, this will increase damage, this will do that. Here you don't really need to explain it. Yet there is an explanation for this, but it's very clear how it works. Like once you understand, that's what the game's doing, it becomes very clear. It's very easy to understand. You will just know how it works. Even if you don't know the exact things, you can read like maybe water increases electrical damage by 20%. You can read that. That's fine. But it is clear to you what it does and how it interacts with each other, even if you don't know the exact stats. And I think that's really important. In a If you have the possibility to do that in your game, it's a very good thing to do because it basically makes that people have to learn less. And once again, people will not be as scared of your game if they see stuff they already know. They know they don't have to learn it. They know they already understand how all that works. So that's great. Yes. Then there is splitting complexity. We basically had this all the time. I just put it there for completionist sakes. Splitting complexity is like here in Diablo, you have 5 classes, and each of these classes have their own character tree, and so you have basically you hide away 1/4 or 4/5 basically of the complexity of the overall game by giving them a decision at the beginning with actually in this game, like if you just play it and don't read anything with basically very little knowledge, it's more kind of a flavor decision and then giving them the rest of the complexity inside the character. What that does is it increases replayability because you can play as this character, as this, or as that one without putting too much on the player at the very beginning. It works very well for Diablo, and I think it's like there are a lot of games doing that. Basically, every RPG on the earth does that. Like almost every game does that. Like not all of them. I actually think Path of Exile is an example who doesn't do it. Like, but that's another thing. Like, so basically, I think that's already it. I don't really have games right now to talk about. Like, I have some ideas in mind, but I don't think it's these are really fleshed out, and I don't want to force to come up with games all the time. Don't want to be forced to come up with games. I did that last time with FIFA, and I think people noticed. And the other game I think was kind of nice idea, but the FIFA one was like not really fleshed out, and I didn't want to put not fleshed out ideas here. So just to wrap it up once more, um, what I think about complexity is like there are a lot of games right now that have a really high complexity, and a lot of the games put it all up front. And I think you can have a very similar experience if you just think about to decrease your complexity. And I actually think that the most successful games do that. Like if you look at Path of Exile, yes, it is very complex. Even from the very beginning. If you look at the skill tree, it's very scary. But to cater to their audience, they really want to have as much complexity as they can. Their skill system is very complex with a very nice system to increase the complexity over time, to have a lot of possibilities. And that is only possible because they use a system. If you design a game that doesn't want to be as complex, that maybe wants to cater to a more casual audience a little bit, then you can still have this very complex game if you just do good systems, make it with a good theme. Like let's say you do an RPG and you do like what I said, you you take a look at the skill system of Path of Exile and just take it. You don't even take the normal skill tree stuff. You just throw it away. You say I don't need skill trees. I will just give you maybe 6 basic spells, and then I will give you an array different different enhancers, spell enhancers. And maybe these spell enhancers are even gated complexity. Like maybe you don't see all of them at the very beginning. Like that's what they did with finding that stuff. Like actually they actually gated the complexity inside that system as well, so that you don't have, so that they can put their basically 40 enhancers or however many they have, because you need to find them still, and you don't need to know about all of them. But you don't need to do it like that. You can also say that maybe not every spell is not every spell can take every enhancer, or not every enhancer can combine with every other thing. And so like maybe you can do it like this, but like as I said, I don't really have an exact idea about this. But that's one way, if you gate the complexity there and use a similar system, that you can actually have a game that is not too complex at the beginning for a player, but is still complex enough overall for an experienced player to really sink their teeth into, and maybe for a casual player to really get the taste of how it feels like to play a very complex game, and like think about all that stuff and think about outside the game and everything like that. And if you then combine that with the elemental stuff I was talking about, or other stuff that people know with the theme basically, then you actually can do a very complex game without putting all the complexity up front. But it's not only this is not only for RPGs possible. You can do that for all kinds of stuff. If you do a strategy game, if you have systems that actually make sense and are easy to understand for people, it will be easier for them to apply them. The problem is often that the rules seem arbitrary, and it's hard to remember that stuff. And like it's like a lot different if you need to spend 200 minerals to build something, or you need to spend wood, for example. Like the exact number then also plays a role. Like how do you do that? But like that's all very, it's a very tricky thing to do. Like I don't really have a good solution for this because I didn't really think deep about this. But I think if you look at an RTS, you also have a lot of possibilities to basically decrease the complexity via theme. Like obviously you can do the same thing with burning stuff and all the things, but you can also maybe apply that to your building stuff, and like also the building order of stuff. Like if that makes more sense, it's more easy for people to understand. That's what I wanted to say. But maybe you don't even need buildings. That's another thing I was thinking about. RTS games that don't really have build orders. You could even hide complexity there once again. You can also if you want to have gated complexity, what you can also do, which is a very interesting concept by the way, you can randomize. Like if you have a match-based game like an RTS, you can basically randomize the stuff you give to the player. Like let's say you play StarCraft, and instead of having all the possibilities you have in StarCraft, um, you will at the beginning, let's say you have 5 races instead of 3, you have 5 races, and like you don't want to increase the complexity, so at the beginning of the game you will just get to choose between 3 races. And that's actually not a good idea. Now, okay, let's do it differently. You don't have a race, and at the beginning of the game, the buildings you can build are randomly determined, and there are not that many. Like actually, there are no more buildings than you could build in one, or like maybe just 10 buildings or something like that. Like a very small subset of buildings, going more the upgrade paths of the buildings, and like having everything inside a building that's related to it and with the upgrades. And so you can basically have like maybe your game has 200 buildings overall, but only 10 each game, and you get to look at them before the game for a couple of minutes or maybe 1 or 2, and then you will just start. Something like that. That's not a perfect idea. I'm just throwing around ideas here. So, but what you can do, basically, what I wanted to say is you can hide complete things for one match, and just put a subset of all of your stuff in one match, and then in the next match there's another subset of things. And if you do that, you can actually get a lot of can get a lot of replayability, a lot of deaths, because like people need to react all the time on what they actually have without upfronting all that complexity once again. So I hope you enjoyed this as always. If you like this episode or this devlog in general, please subscribe to me on YouTube. You can go to my Facebook page, that's Will Glow the Wisp on Facebook. Look at IndieDB, search for Will Glow the Wisp. You can download my game Will Glow the Wisp there. You can visit my website, which is www.parttimeindie.com, where you can get all the other informations, link to my Facebook page, link to my Twitter account. In the comment section of the video or in the description section of the video, you will find links to tick source, to basically everything you need. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice weekend. Bye. Oops.